Okay, this is on. Thank you for the ones who stayed until the end. We now have a debate on neoliberalism and mental health. So I'll start just saying a few very brief words. Then I'll introduce the panel, and Rex Haig will say a few words as well before the panel starts debating. So I think the idea of this debate was, in a sense, this morning and this afternoon we were talking about what I think they are mostly humanistic approaches to human distress and a way of meeting patients as people, as humans. And in a sense, the mental health system seems to be geared in a contrary way to this way of being. So, despite the humanistic tendencies of the approaches that we've heard today, the technical and positivistic side of psychiatry continues to grow. There are more and more manualized therapies, the spread of diagnostic categories. I can say that the very first version of diagnostic and statistical manual, even before the first version, had, I think, 22 illnesses. The last version has 600. So there's something here that seems a bit strange to me. There are new generation antipsychotics and antidepressants. As if they are anti-something. In some, the commodification of mental health continues to rise. So increasingly, we find ourselves in a quick fix culture dominated by a technical, rational model of science, a change nicely termed by some authors as the McDonaldization of society. I'll give an example. In the UK alone, the number of prescriptions for antidepressants raised from 31 million in 2006 to 64 million in 2016, so over 100% increase. Just recently, 2017, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health said the world needs a revolution in mental health care. And he raised three problems: the dominance of the biomedical model, asymmetries of power, and the biased use of scientific evidence in mental health care. So this is just a very brief introduction of some of the things troubled me and the reason why I thought this debate would be important. So just before Rex say a few words, I'll briefly introduce the panel. So thank you very much for being here, all of you. Professor Stangalini, Professor Saikula were already introduced. We have to join us only one psychiatrist, Professor Pio Abreu, who is a psychiatrist at the University Hospital of Coimbra, Associate Professor at the School of Medicine. He has a vast career. He has also been engaged in psychotherapy, was president of the Portuguese Society of Psychodrama. He has a number of books, and as a citizen, he has always played political, social, and cultural activities with various interventions, opinion articles, and columns in newspapers of national circulation. So the full bio is within your book. I also thank Professor Raquel Varela, who is a historian, a researcher, and university professor at University of Lisbon, Nova, where she coordinates the study group on global labor history. She is international visiting senior professor at the Fluminense Federal University and honorary fellow of the International Institute for Social History, within many, many other roles that you can see on your book. And also Dr. Barreto Xavier. He He was Secretary of State for Culture, National Director for the Arts, Councillor for Culture of Oeiras City Hall, Director and Program of Lugar Comum Artistic Experimentation Center, also within many other roles. He currently lectures at the ISCTE, University of Lisbon, and you can see the full bio in your book as well. So I thank you all very much for being present, and I hope this is a fruitful debate. I think Rex Haig wants to say a few words. Do you want me to introduce you as well, Rex, a little? Or do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Joao. Is this microphone okay? Can you hear me? Okay, thanks, sir. Yes, I was going to mention the Special Rapporteur as well, because I do think it's so important that this debate is taken into a political arena. And the quote I was going to give was the United Nations Special Rapporteur last year, 2017, said, "We need little short of a revolution in mental health care to end decades of neglect, abuse and violence." And I think unless we capture this growing feeling that all is not well in mental health and do something different about it, services will continue to deteriorate. But I think we have been hearing something today about the beginning of a reaction against that, the very industrialized, mechanical, corporate way of doing mental health that just isn't really going to meet people's needs. And just a couple of points I'll make about what's happening in the UK at the moment. One of the things that several of us are trying to pull together is a theme of relational practice and democratic mental health. My own background is in therapeutic communities. Democratic therapeutic communities, and that's very, very much a process where people are involved in dialogue about their own care. It's very dialogic and group-based in the way decisions are made. And I think we're one of a family of therapies that includes open dialogue, that includes enabling environments, that includes multi-systemic therapy, that are different to what I call the alpha-betty therapies, which seem to be in a rather horrible competition with each other. So there's MBT and DBT and CBT and DIT and all these sort of letters, a whole alphabet full of letters that seem to be saying we've got more randomized control trials than you that prove we work. And that isn't what matters. What matters is the therapeutic relationship. It's that quality of dialogism, that way of being together with each other. And I think that's what we've been hearing about so far today. But it's not just a clinical matter. I think it's a political matter that's stopping us from being able to do that. So with that, I think I'm going to enjoy this debate and hearing more about putting some substance on that. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
So now that, with some ideas. So should we... Do you have anyone prepared? You prepared something? Yeah. Okay.
About the theme?
About the theme.
Yes, I can start because I am psychiatrist. Thank you for the invitation, and my honor staying here. But my way is not. Yes, I have written some books, but my work is constantly staying in front of patients and trying to avoid they commit suicide, they commit homicide, and have problems like this. And I need to use pharmacies, okay, and I use when it is necessary. Yes, but I think that there is a great usage of medicines, and I think there is something wrong in Portugal with compulsive admission and with compulsive treatment, and some of Portuguese patients are obliged to take medicines during 3 years to 5 years. It's a frequent practice in Portugal, and perhaps they don't need to have. Yes. At this world, we are closer with all the research we have. We are very close to find what is human mind and what is human nature, but where we are very far of knowing what is psychopathology. I think we don't have some help for the consensus of psychiatrists to establish the map of disorders. And I think this is the main problem we have in psychopathology and possibility of treating patients. Am I speaking well? Do you understand? Okay. Yes. Okay. About the theme, about neoliberalism and mental health, I think neoliberalism has two assertions that are far off the human nature. First, the individuality. The human nature, and we know we are not individual persons. We are social persons. And we are more humans as social we are. To understand reality, to understand objectivity, we have to go to the shows of other people to know the things. And this is a phenomenological idea about comprehension. When I see this, I can see from my perspective and from perspective of other people that say it. So, to understand some objectively, I have to put in shoes of other persons. And I know, as you can see this, or this, and as you can see this, which is different from me. Okay? So, the great problem of human nature is to be intersubjective. And schizophrenics have problems with this. Schizophrenics are generally the center of the world. And in some times, they are prevented to stay in shoes of other person. Okay, I can speak some stories, some interesting stories to illustrate this. Very simple, but individualism, we are in fact social persons. What distinguishes us from other animals, which have also their family and have instincts, but we have relationships with other persons and intersubjectivity. And this is what constructs our identity, which is also a very important issue of the human nature. Second assertion of neoliberalism, competition and not cooperation. In fact, all what we have constructed and our language, our imagination, this house, for instance, our mind is constructed by cooperation with other people and not with competition. They take the competition from Darwin, but forget that life is based on cooperation. Animals cooperate, cells cooperate, organs cooperate between them, and we cooperate with other persons to construct towns, for instance, and internet. The third great problem to finish is that, in fact, we are more a thing than a subject. Okay. And there are a lot of instances trying to transform us in robots. And sometimes we have to switch the rules. We have to be robots, without argumentation, for instance, but doing what other people wants me to do. And in fact, perhaps like George Well has spoken, nowadays we have the internet, we have the iPhone, these devices. We need completely Facebook, for instance, and we are now completely dominated by artificial intelligence. And we have some problems now. We can say that we are in a schizophrenic society because nothing is more private. For instance, I can have fantasies. I can have fantasies. They are in my brain. Nobody knows about this. But when I put fantasies in my telemobile and in my Facebook, everyone knows about me. And I have the dilemma of schizophrenics, that they think, but they think that all other people know what they are thinking. They feel and they think that all other people know what they feel. and they tend to be manipulated, as I can be manipulated now by artificial intelligence of my iPhone. Thank you.
Sorry for my English, because I didn't realize I was supposed to speak in English, so sorry, it will be broken English. There is a famous psychiatrist in Asturias, the name I don't remember. He reported that half of their community was in mental health care. And he answered, well, when somebody comes to me and says he's unemployed or he's suffering in a job, I always say, you don't need a psychiatrist, you need a workers' commission. And I think this is a very interesting approach. Certainly we need both, because this, and we need probably much more than a psychiatrist and a workers' commission, since we are dealing with very complex collective problems. But I think this idea puts ourselves within the centrality of labor, which is the main question in neoliberalism. So I would say, as a labor historian, and it's a pleasure to be here among you, that you know much more about mental health than I, that the pattern of neoliberalism is a deep change in labor relations, and this affects both patients and both physicians, because physicians also have their labor relations. So what happened now is that the hospital has become a factory with organization time, with evaluation of patterns, with the protocols that are standardization of the psychiatrist's job, and with rules that are coming directly from the 30s, from the books that manage the factories and labor in the 30s. So these physicians also need help. That's why we have all the problem among doctors, among physicians, not exclusive, of course, and they are dealing with patients that are in a terrible situation. I must say that I have now 5 or 6 projects on burnout and living and labor conditions, because we don't really believe there is such a category like burnout, but I cannot develop this. But we have a multidisciplinary team that is dealing with studies in the unions. And these are both intellectual and manual work. And the situation is near the catastrophic. Everybody's sad, everybody's afraid, and everybody's tired. These are the main 3 words we hear all the time. So what we find here in our conclusions, which I'm going to be very fast to share it with you, is the pattern why people are tired, because we have shortened the working time hours in the 19th century from 16 to 8 hours, and we haven't shortened in the 20th century, and it's growing to the 21st century. This is the first question. The second is that the intensity of labor, because neoliberalism assumes that labor is a cost. In fact, profit is a cost for society, not labor. So all the teams disappear, and one person has to do the job of 2 or 3 or 4 persons, including jobs which they are not skilled to do. So, for example, teachers, they have to do a lot of bureaucratic job that they are against it because they don't like it, but also because they don't know it. They have doctors, for example, physicians in Portugal, they are in despair because the computers don't work. And then you are in the hospital and there is no one in the hospital that can fix the computer. And we find the labor has become deeply intense. The third was already referred by Pio de Abreu, which is competition against cooperation, but people are evaluated in their labor place in neoliberalism according to the number of people they can destroy in the way. It's not according to the number of people with whom you have cooperated, how you have built teams. I give you my own example. We have built this team to study mental health and labor conditions here in my university, but this is sponsored by the unions. If we ask to the state money for this, we cannot do it because I cannot, as a historian, ask money to study mental health, and a physician cannot ask money to study labor relations. Everybody will ask us in the National Foundation, why are you a physician and you are studying strikes? There's nothing to do. So, and the second is, of course, that all the jobs nowadays, avaliação de desempenho, I don't know you call it in English, which is performance, is that the companies in neoliberalism, they have chosen this model. The company, the mother company, stays with all the money and financial sector. And they have subcontractors who stay, who have the workers, and they pay social security. This means that the small companies and middle companies, lots of times, they are not lying, they don't have money to pay more wages. Because all the money is in the top company. In the top company, you have what was developed in Japan after the Second World War, is that the model in general, not just in top companies, is that you have 5% of the workforce protected, and all the rest in a pyramidal scheme is without protection. Inside all this pyramidal sector, you have their own pyramidal sector in each one of these sectors. This means that even in the same company, all the small companies are against each other. They are in competition, and you are evaluated according to this performance, according to certain tasks. The problem is that these tasks are always different in reality. So you never get the excellent or the very good. It's absolutely impossible because, for example, if you are a physician, they say you have to see patients each 15 minutes, but there is a more complex patient. But you are going to be evaluated not according to this complex patient, but according to the 15 minutes. So most of the people don't reach the top. And if they reach the top, they have to destroy the people around them. They are not evaluated according to the number of teams and to the achievements they have to do collectively. So, for example, my own evaluation as researcher, I'm asked as top evaluation the number of articles I wrote alone. This is specifically in my evaluation. And now of course, I don't care anymore because I wrote wonderful collective articles, but of course, everybody has to do this in the beginning of their jobs because otherwise they will not go on in the career. Just another three short things, which I think is labor has become a philosophical problem, but labor is not recognized by society. So if you are a physician, your colleagues will recognize your work, but the rest of the society doesn't really know what you are doing. This is a general problem in labor because you don't have public recognition by your job. And this is a terrible problem for mental health problems, because labor, we have developed as humans as cooperative, but also in recognition of our group. And labor is the central, as a core place in our world, because we become humans by labor, in fact. We invented labor. That's what makes us different from animals. It's the creativity, the intelligence, the manual and intellectual work associated with this. The other problem is ethics suffer. Ethics suffer, would you say this in English? This is a concept developed by Christophe Dejour, which means that because of this organization, you cannot do your work properly. So you suffer with it. Of course, this can lead to serious mental problems, but can also lead to cynicism. Lots of people say, oh, I went to, the teacher don't care about me, or the physician, or the man in the public servants. The problem is that people, in order to don't continue to suffer because they cannot do their work properly, they become a part of their, they dissociate themselves, they depersonalize. It's a process of alienation, in fact. It's a classical process of alienation because they don't feel part of the process. And in the appearance, for us, it looks that these people are rude, or that these people don't care about us. But they are in suffering, most of them, because psychopaths, in fact, are very happy if they are in the top of the company, dismissing people or whatever. So if people usually become cynic or rude, it's because they are not psychopaths. It's because they are suffering. My last remark about this would be that I think this is a general question. It looks very philosophic, but it's very important for our debate. It's the postmodern instrumental reason that is dominated in the universities and in intellectual work in the West. And we need a critical reason. So the idea that the individual, because capitalism was deeply revolutionary against God and in defending the reason, defending the rationality. But, as you know, positivism has huge limits. And the main limit is that God has not the reason anymore, but individuals have the reason. And this is not true. Reason is outside of us. Reason, in science, for example, it comes from experience, it comes from experiments, it comes from validation of methods, it comes from research. It's not because I want that I'm right. And this is a general problem because we keep seeing terrible things in the society, which is, oh, my kid is hyperactive. And the problem is because he likes very much to play PlayStation. And he stays all day there because he loves it. And who has the reason? The kid that loves PlayStation, the mother that says that, and everybody has individual reasons. And this is a short example which I think has contaminated all the society. We need a critical theory saying this is not correct. It doesn't matter if you want it. It doesn't matter if you believe it. It's not correct because there is a critical reason outside individuals that should be submitted to science. Science is not the choice of an individual and their pleasure and the way they woke up in certain day. It's much more about critical reason. So I think this is a key factor because sometimes we cannot even have these debates because immediately we are put it in places where we don't belong. So, for example, we really have a problem in the boys. Boys take much more Ritalin than girls because sex exists. Sex exists. And boys, in average, they need much more time playing physically than girls. Otherwise, they become very excited. With other, you know much more than me that there are other problems. But certainly you say, oh, sex exists. We do have more boys taking Ritalin, so we need to act, we need to think which kind of school do we have. And suddenly everybody says, no, no, no. It's not about sex, it's about gender. Why? Because I choose. And then you just... We cannot continue a dialogue from here. It's deeply ideological. We cannot leave the science in the hands of these ideological political agendas that are, the problem is that they are not political. The problem is that they are neoliberal politics. Thank you very much.
And I will take about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes as Raquel. I wrote some words because it's easier for me to explain what I want to say to you, and then I want to discuss some issues that which we are doing, Raquel Varela already exposed. Some issues I agree, some not, and I think we can have a good dialogue. Anyway, to speak about neoliberalism and mental health, I would like to refer freedom and restriction. The place of man is at the same time a place of freedom and of restriction. We live between limitations and conditioning on one hand, and between opportunities and choices on the other hand. And our representations of both are measured from a meta-representation, which is the concept of normality. What is normal, the norm, as we know it, is at the same time the affirmation of the dominant powers through their institutions and the conformation of the members of a given community to the dominant powers. Normality is a basic construct for the regulation, the possibility of a community life. At the same time, it is an operative key to inclusion and exclusion, placing within the community the normal and outside the community the abnormal. We know today that the categorizations of normality and abnormality cannot be used in absolute perspective, and the social institutions are organized at various levels and micro levels and vary in time and space. Speaking on Western Europe, I will give some examples. At macro level, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was normal for the state not to have a public health system. At the beginning of the 21st century, it will be completely abnormal for the state not to have a public health system. At meso level, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was normal for a village not to have a public lighting system. At the beginning of the 21st century, this situation is abnormal. Finally, at micro level, it was normal to have several generations of a family living in the same house. Such a situation is now abnormal. The social sense of normality is a dynamic framework with variations in time and space, and with different levels of manifestation and different and complex levels of combinations. In the last decades, a set of phenomena linked together, some of which are of a known nature and others completely new, have placed us in a situation of enormous complexity. Phenomena such as the globalization of trade, internet, the democratization of screens, radical social movements, wars, population growth, the victory of moral relativism as a guideline for private conduct. All these phenomena can be represented as a DNA double helix. On the first helix, the globalization of trade, internet, the democratization of screens, the growth of radical social movements, the destruction of natural resources, wars, and population growth contribute decisively to the medium and long-term and sustainability of the current models of life in Western countries, namely the patterns of consumption and ways of living that correspond to a given normality. On the second helix, moral relativism as a guideline for private life claims the bankruptcy of natural value systems and taxonomies, referring values and practices to the domain of social constructions, homogenizing different orders of value and conduct for private life. Everything is normal, nothing is abnormal. During the last 4 decades, neoliberal movements are a reality in Western societies. Economic, political, and social visions that seeks to refer to include all human life and all the planet assets under market umbrella. These movements contribute to an increase of global economic wealth and, at the same time, to dramatic imbalances between levels of wealth, living conditions, and opportunities. This is in direct relation with the deregulation of the welfare state, deregulation of working hours, deregulation of the global financial system, referring to the idea of economic growth as an end in itself, superior to all the others. Giving the abstract idea that everything is possible regarding personal choices of identity and representation. All choices for each individual life are in this respect normal. In relation with market dynamics, it is a normal parameter, the grade of capability of material goods acquisition. And most of the citizens on Western societies are faced with a hard reality in their daily lives. The difference between the generated expectations and the political and economic constraints, the labor model's constraints, the distance between desire and concretization. Contemporary Western normality refers to the commodification of all the aspects of our time and space and the deregulation of human behavior. It means a balance between the totalitarianism of representations and standardizations of success and happiness based on the individual power of acquisition and exhibition of goods and the moral relativism of conduct. Today, we are closed in the idea of open space, of open society. Economically, the orientation is commodification. Money can buy everything. Morally, anything is possible. It is normal to be abnormal, and it is abnormal to be normal. Through these two perspectives, the extinction of normality was achieved. If mercantilization, coupled with political, economic, cultural, and social deregulation, has been a space for building individual freedom, on the other hand, it has hampered with neoliberalism preeminence the conditions of a life in community, leading to individual and social fragmentation. If moral relativism contributed to improving the status of minorities, creating new systems of social inclusion, it also contributed to resentment in significant parts of the Western population. Any community needs institutions, norms to survive. Most of our institutions are in disruption. Corruption in politics, extensive and intensive economic and financial exploitation, deconstruction of traditional moral values, exposure and permanent interaction in networking society have led Western society to a closure in its openness. Our open space, material and immaterial, is today so large that has generated the fragmentation of the idea of a greater good, without which there is no community. It has generated new forms of tribalization, new forms of territorial organization, no longer around a physical or political space, but around a set of tribal beliefs anchored in the diffusion and assimilation of fake news. Nowadays, more important than the truth of the facts are the beliefs of our tribe. Facts do not exist. There are only representations. In a society without a normal order, there are no longer legitimate authorities. Given the failure of traditional authorities, the state, the church, the army, the West is mobilized around new authorities. The contemporary gurus, business gurus, sex gurus, alternative therapist gurus, gastronomy lifestyle gurus, personal trainers, psys, artists, esoterics, leaders of religious sects or violent social intervention groups. The new normality is saturated with too many competitive values and material opportunities which have generated new tribalisms and weakened the sense of community. If I want to find responsibles for this situation in a simplistic way, I will denounce two ideologies, Marxism and neoliberalism. These two streams believe the same at a certain level, that whoever holds the means of production holds the power. And in an obsession to organize social life around the appropriation and domination of the means of production, both Marxism and neoliberalism reduce the concept of man to classes of men and to productive units. At present, we acknowledge the failure of Marxism and neoliberalism, but also of social democracy and Christian democracy. We acknowledge the inability of the representative democratic institutions to find consistent alternatives models in the West for the validation of an idea of community. Many citizens of the West live between depression and anxiety, and one cannot ignore the role of the pressures that new normalities and new threats have in this situation. The fragility of institutions has fostered the fragility of democracies, and as in all fragile communities, hyenas cheer their opportunity. It is not surprising nowadays that mental illness increases, but we must not forget that mental illness itself is a category, a very profitable representation in a hyper-medicated society. Hence, beyond the claustrophobia of contemporary open space and the panic of the absence of normality, I hope that we will find alternatives to our contemporary saturation of ourselves. Now, thank you.
I don't know if Jaco or Giovanni want to comment on this. Or, so, yeah.
I don't have any prepared speech, or I don't have any, let's say, a kind of program about the area of neoliberalism. So that perhaps for me, all these comments that we have heard are very interesting and a very specific point of view of important issues. At the same time, I think that one part of this area we are living, that there are many things going into many different directions at the same time. So that even if I can follow that what has happened in the development of organizing the work, I can also realize that, that for instance, science and research has become much more, much nearer the real life, in the way that, for instance, scientific project nowadays I always conduct it as a work of team with multidisciplinary perspective, and there is much less of work done only in one expert position, which in my mind makes possibility to have more valid knowledge of the life. And also when I think of my own practice that I have been involved, so that at the same time seeing all these problems that has happened in increase of, let's say, diagnostic categories, or huge increase of medication and so on. I've been involved almost 40 years in a very different kind of practice, in which I really have a feeling that it's possible also to make a kind of system of services in which we respect each other. And again, these services also are built up based on this teamwork, working together in a very shared way, instead of having a kind of definition that there is one person up that defines how the work is done, and so on. So that for me, at the same time, there are very many important critical points of the society. There is also a kind of options for looking at the same time. Perhaps the last comment is that, as we had a discussion in the very last comment, for me it's very important in the work that I've been doing, even if working with all my career with the most of mental health problems as psychotic problems, I think and deal with these less and less pathological ideas, and more like kind of responses that is a part of life, if that's a normality or not, but still not to focus on these psychopathological issues, because the more we focus on defining some things as pathological, the more we give power to the medical companies, to the doctors, to the psychotherapists, and the less is power for the people who are suffering in their lives.
So as with Jaco, I had not prepared a proper talk. Indeed, I was very curious to see what was going to happen in this round table. I made some notes, and I hope that what I'm going to say will make sense to you. Well, after listening to you, the question that came to my mind is neoliberalism an illness? And if it is an illness, which illness is it? Or another question could be, is neoliberalism related to some sort of illness? Or is it causing a special kind of illness that may become epidemic in our society? Of course, I dare not answer these questions, but what came to my mind next was that this attempt to connect a given kind of society with a given kind of pathology, mental pathology, is a kind of sport that has been played for at least 1 century. Perhaps the first sportsman in this field was Sigmund Freud. Civilization and its Discontents, it's an essay that dates back 90 years ago. And by the way, Freud, although was very cautious in associating a kind of society with a kind of illness, he was the first to bring forward an idea that I find very prophetic. He was speaking of the time of prostasis. And I think this is really prophetic. He could foresee that modernity, and especially late modernity, was the time of prostasis, the time in which the human body, the human mind, the human capacities were not enough to do what? Okay. And this sport was also played by several extraordinary minds in the 20th century. Think of Deleuze and Guattari, the book Anti-Oedipus, and the association between the civilization of the machine with schizophrenia. We live by a schizophrenic and schizophrenogenic society. And quite an analogous idea was brought forward by my friend Louis Sass in his book Madness and Modernism. We live, modernism is an era in which rationality, or better, hyper-rationality prevails, producing a kind of split within the subject, within a subject who is reflecting on itself. And that's what he calls hyper-reflexivity, which is, according to Louis Sass, both the kernel of schizophrenia and the kernel of modernity. Or think of what has been said about so-called collective or collectivistic societies and their link to dutifulness, to order, and then to the production of the sad passion that is depression. So the link between collectivistic societies, as society used to be in this part of the world just before Second World War, and the production of depressive illness. And a kind of reference book here is Hubertus Stellenbach's book named Melancholia. But also think, and I want to make it too long, I want to come to the point, the connection between so-called postmodern or late modern society and, of course, individualism, but also narcissism. And this point has been stressed at least by a Korean philosopher who is called Byung-Chul Han, whom you may read in English and also in Spanish, in a book, very important book, and perhaps one of the most important philosophy book in the last 10 years. It's called The Agony of Eros. Or by Michel Foucault himself, who was one of the first to analyze the destiny of late modern individualistic society, pointing out that a new anthropological configuration was coming out from late modern individualistic society that he called Homo economicus. Homo economicus, this is exactly what we are trying to talk about. I could mention here Pierpaolo Pasolini, if you want, or others. There is an ongoing debate, for instance, too much father, too little father in our society, okay? But this is simply ridiculous. Let's go to serious things. So, a few ideas about Homo economicus, that is the anthropological configuration of neoliberalistic society, at least according to Foucault, according to Byung-Chul Han or Giorgio Agamben in Italy. My last book, by the way, is exactly on this topic. About there is a whole part about Homo economicus. What is Homo economicus? Homo economicus is the apotheosis of individualism. That means of the values, the musts, the commitments to usefulness. Only what is useful should be done, what is not useful should not be done. Production, of course. Everything that is not productive is something to be cut, okay? And of course, optimization, cost effectiveness, performance, as you said. If you want to sum up in a formula the commitment of Homo economicus, or the value structure of Homo economicus, we could say that this is the society of the you can. Or better, if you can, then you must. Okay? Whereas the collectivistic society was the society of you must. Ours is the society of the if you can, then you must. And this makes us feel, or at least part of us feel, very free, but it's very tricky. Freedom. Because according to this principle, I am my own capital, my own boss, my own staff, and my own project. And if I fail, I am the only one who is responsible for this failure. I cannot blame anyone for this failure. If you can, then you must. And now I wear the psychopathologist hat and say the kind of pathology that is connected to this kind of society, I want to play the sport too, like the others, is of course narcissism. I would call it narcissism 2.0. And the kind of depression that is related to this new kind of narcissism is certainly not the melancholic depression they were talking about this morning. It's not the depression made of sadness, but it's a depletion depression. It's a burnout depression. It's totally a new kind of depression at issue. And I can tell you, dear colleagues, that in the next 10 or 20 years, our offices will be full of these patients, and the hospitals too. And these are very difficult patients if you don't have in mind their anthropological setup that is certainly driven or associated by a deep change in society. These are the patients who come to your office the 1st of August, on December 24th, because they can afford to fall ill only when they are on holidays. And they want to recover in 7 days, even less. And if they don't commit suicide, because they do, they will certainly not recover in the full sense, but they will be symptomatically recovered and go back to their previous habits in 7 days, even less. And this is surprising, but this is also quite a big problem. These are the new drug users. Drug users are only partly the old drug users. because these people use stimulants. I can tell you that I was recently in Milan, which is supposed to be quite an industrious town, and near the square of the stock exchange, there is one of the most important squares for drug smugglers. Not in periphery, but in the center of Milan. They use stimulants in the morning, they use sleep tablets in the night, and they use amusing drugs during the weekend. Okay, so not to mention their romantic life, but this is all another issue, and I will stop here.
One suggestion I would make is if people want to respond to each other first, and then we open the debate to the rest of the audience. Yeah.
I would like to comment about what Giovanni said. Well, but I think you can listen. Yeah? Okay. Because, or you need it for record. You need it, but it's not working.
Try to switch now.
Well, about Homo economicus, as you know, Foucault didn't finish his reflection about it. It's curious because it was quite seduced by the subject and neoliberalism and Homo economicus, but he moved in the early 80s before dying to other subjects more connected. Raquel, if you don't mind, if you, more connected with the questions of eros and the self and so on. But anyway, when he worked with the Homo economicus, we don't know exactly if he was seduced by neoliberalism or if he was against neoliberalism. But my point is that we need to concern more about men beyond economicos. We are quite centered in the economical question. Of course it's important, of course it's fundamental, but it's not the only one. And what I'm criticizing is exactly that neoliberalism and Marxism, in the different perspectives, are centering the man in the economical side of life. Even Guattari and Deleuze, when created the anti-Oedipo, it's a neo-Marxist perspective in that perspective. But anyway, we need to move to decommodification, and that decommodification, it's not only the excessive euphoria with market, but we also, when Raquel is saying we become men through labor, of course, we also become men through labor, but not only through labor. This idea that labor is central to our existence, it's one of the problems today, because today, in Western Europe, in 10, 20, 30 years, the idea of labor will change. And nowadays, we have, I don't know how much, but Raquel probably knows it better than me, maybe 20%, between 16-20% of unemployed in the European Union. How much are they? Less? 10 to 15? 10 to 15. But after that, if you, okay, 10 to 15. But then you have when retired people. How much are the retired in retreat in the European Union? Let's say about the population, how much? If you put it maybe more 10, 15. Let's say then 30% of European population, maybe because today, because of health cares, with 80 years old, you can be active, are out of labor idea. But if the referential is the labor idea, of course they are in a very insecure situation. We need to defend who is working. We need to defend the rights of the workers, naturally. But I think that we can't center all our life in an axe that is labor. Because, of course, this was a very important axe for the first industrial revolution, where the exploitation of the workers was really terrible. And we are aware that during all the 20th century, the exploitation is there. We know that we need unions. We know we need to defend labor part of the society. But this is not the only thing. The market and the labor issues are not the only thing. We are multidimensional when we need to celebrate and to defend our multidimensionality.
Just want to clarify something which I think is important. When I refer to labor as the essence of how we become humans, was not about commodified labor, but labor as an activity. So how we have learned how to use our fingers and developed our brain because of labor. And labor is about creativity. So the problem of neoliberalism is that it reduces us to commodified wage labor. But labor can be playing piano, which I was doing this morning, and I don't getting any money with this. So labor as in an ontological sense.
You can call it labor, but you can call it other things.
No, I don't think. I think it's important to call it labor because it's what distinguishes us. It's the relation between execution. No, what I don't believe is that we have to reduce labor and production of richness to wage commodified labor. And the other problem, which I think it's connected with the discussion that was raised by Marxism, and I think it's important to point out. Neoliberalism is not the exception of capitalism. It's the late capitalism. It's exactly where capitalism goes. Because capitalism is a historical process which ended, which is ending can be hundreds of years, in a process of high concentration of companies and profit, and in the proletarianization of massive sectors of so-called middle classes. But why have I called Marxism here, was called here as two sides, or well, I will not, of course, reduce your argument, but why I think Marxism is so important? Because of two things that someone who is an inspiration for me, António Coimbra de Matos, a Portuguese psychoanalyst, he has developed the concept of revolt and relation. Why is Marxism so important? Because I think one of the problems of neoliberalism is that neoliberalism is a dystopia and Marxism is a utopia. I don't defend what happened in the Soviet Union, so for me that was not Marxism, that was a huge problem, in fact, for the left and for everything that we are, why we don't react today. But we need, as humans, as society, to project a better future. The idea that we are living in permanent sacrifices and that the next day will be worse and that we have not a future and a project is a deeply depressed idea. I don't know if it would be depressed in the medical sense, that's what, in that sense that I'm using. So we need meta-narratives. Because we are living in a process where the meta-narrative is that there are no meta-narratives, there are no projects. We live in a teleological era where Fukuyama is still dominant, saying that there is no alternative. That's the dominant process. So I think we have to discuss in what kind of society we want to live, what would be the problems of collectivization, because there are problems of collectivization, how we will deal with small property, etc. What would be the role of individual freedoms? So lots of questions that we have learned with the experience of the Soviet Union that we have to do nowadays. But we cannot take out the idea of transforming societies, of people that are... Why I've called Coimbra de Matos here? Because he has developed the notion of one, revolt. If you are not well, you have to say no. That's the beginning of everything. Everything. We have written a book together, and we have written there, if you are suffering sexual or moral harassment, you should beat in your boss. That's the first thing you have to do if you want to be okay. But then you cannot be dismissed, so it's better that you organize. And then it comes the notion of relation. Of course, I'm not going to solve the problem because I've beat my boss. So because then I will be unemployed with a huge problem. So I have to do this in a conspiracy way. And that's something that de Jure defends very clearly. We need to do conspiracy in the workplaces against what is harming us. This is absolutely essential because we cannot threat to be without money to pay the bills. So revolt, relation, and the other thing is future. That's why Coimbra de Matos has broke with the classical notion of psychoanalysis that's just in the past. So I'm not going to, I don't want to make simple such a develop thesis he has, but he believes that together with the past we need the future. When somebody goes to a place, we cannot just ask him what has happened with your mother when you were 2 years old. We need to ask people what you want from the future. What are your projects? How you want to live with your wife? In which place you would like to live? How you would like to work? That's absolutely essential. And Marxism, in that way, for me, it's still the best instrument. I must be very serious about this, because Marxism is about radical transformation of a society based on commodification. And the society we are not going to be all happy because of that. We have huge problems to face, but we have to solve this. We cannot live based on the production of profit and be happy with this. This is impossible. Are we going to end profit and be so happy in the next day? No. And Marxism was never about this. If you read the Marx works, it's about totality, it's about creativity, it's about how to set men freedom from labor. In fact, that's the main objective, the main aim.
Is that energy and software can substitute completely the work, generally this work, except the creative work. And perhaps our way and the future work will be the creative work. But I don't know, because as software is made without money, because anyone can make software with a sandwich, okay? But energy is expensive. And the sistema financeiro, the financial system is indexed to energy by the petrodollar. Attention to this. Petrodollar at this moment is the main stone of the financial system. So I ask, what will be when we have, and I have discussed it last Wednesday with Roma Torres, the problem of Anthropocene. You are in an era opposite to Holocene, where humanity is going to have suicide. Because, yes, we're having suicide, because humanity is destroying the planet with climate change. And this is a movement we have perhaps to stop or not. Okay. And with the money indexed to energy, to fossil energy, we are going to destroy the planet and the ecosystem. But I can ask, and when we have renewable energies, wind and wave and all energies that are developing, and we have technology to develop them, but it is not used, because nowadays we are linked to the fossil energy, petrol and gas, and because they are the mainstone of the financial system. I think this is the great problem. And perhaps our strike is for ecology now. The main strike and main conspiration we can do is in fact for ecology.
I think we are coming to a stage where the audience would also like to ask questions, but before that I was also wondering about something, because it seems that the debate went into a direction of the problems of neoliberalism and how that can provoke mental health problems within many other problems. But also I was wondering, as mental health professionals, what I've heard today were what it could be seen as a countercultural, counter-cultural movements, and also in a sense political movements. And as mental health professionals, could we have, this may be an utopia, I don't know, but could we have a role in psychologists, psychiatrists, social worker, nurses? And I mean, we work with people since early ages. Is this also, do we have any power position in, I don't know, I'm just thinking about this. No, your answer is, okay, forget it.
I think there were, before, in time of narcissism, very arrogant psychiatrists that thought that craziness was contagious, and psychiatrists have to control governments, institutions, schools, to control craziness. This was after the Nazism and after.
There are several types of psychiatry.
Yes. But nowadays, psychiatry is a way of helping people, nothing more than this. And I think we have to lose our arrogance. If we are arrogant, this can be dangerous. There are places to solve the great problems of humanity, not in psychiatry. We have to be enough humble to stay helping patients that came to us.
We had, after the debate, a time for reflection and questions, so I think it would be an opportunity to open the debate about this theme and about what has been discussed during the day to the audience. So people were wanting to ask questions just before the break. I don't know if they still have the questions, if there are new questions.
I think there is a thing. I have written in my last book that there is only one relationship between biology and social science. Is dopamine the relationship of dopamine with money? Okay. But nowadays there is a new thing, because between this relation there are the drugs, and the drugs are drugs that rise dopamine. So dopamine, money, and drugs. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions. I would like to thank Professor Raquel Varela to bring into this room the conflict. Dialogue implies disagreement and implies revolt. So it's one of the most important words for psychotic, well, whatever you want to name it, a person in a psychotic experience must learn to say, no, I don't agree, I don't like. So I feel that to speak about dynamic perspective, to treat mental health suffering, that's what we are talking about. If you don't want to speak about pathology or illness, we must speak about suffering. And suffering has many things about fear, and the fear to say no. Thank you. I am a psychiatrist, and I don't feel myself identified to a psychiatry that makes an identity, a simple identity, a linear identity, or monological, whatever you want to speak, between psychopharmacs and suffering and treatment. So I think that the medical model is much more complex. We have causes, complex one. We have symptoms and signs, well, phenomenology. We have a diagnostic. We have diagnosis so that we can identify the needs of people who are suffering. And then we have treatment and prognosis. So this is medical model, not only psychopharmacs. It's a very old or very, I don't know, terrible way of looking at the medical model. So I think that words and concepts about conflict, aggressiveness, and these are definitely important in what we are talking about. So I would like to ask Giovanni Stangelini about how do you consider and conceptualize the relational psychopathology? Because we have symptoms and signs, individual symptoms and signs, but we can observe relational psychopathology. This is also psychopathology. And they have, this psychopathology have, we can describe it as we can describe any other form of psychopathology, individual psychopathology, of signs and symptoms. Another problem I would like to ask mainly to the main speakers today is what if if individuals are mainly social beings, what's the place of groups? I didn't hear the word groups inside. Family is a group, and we are always in groups. So what do you think about group psychotherapy? I introduced here in Portugal the multifamily group, Badaraco's model of the multifamily psychoanalysis, which we may call anything you want. Psychotherapy, multifamily psychotherapy, group analytic psychotherapy, multifamily psychotherapy. But what's your opinion? I don't know if you have this experience, but what's your opinion about these kinds of setting to treat mental suffering? Well, thank you.
I would like to rephrase the discussion between the relation of mental health and civilization issues. And I think that we must be aware that what happens is we don't know the future. Future is the incognito. But what I think, and I see as a psychiatrist, a lot of things have been said here, is that our brain is no more able to cope with these demands of neoliberalism. What I point especially to deregulation. Nowadays, capitalism or economical functioning tries to evade basic dimensions like time, place. People nowadays, they don't know where they are working because they are working in the internet to an American or a Chinese boss. Or he has to speak several languages. What I see is that we are living on a toxic situation. I don't know where we are going. Also, we need some utopia. But I think maybe the proposition of Pio de Abreu, the ecology, is the most sounded and possible. Because Marxism, I think, is, you know, to beat your boss, you have not only problems on the press, but also with the judges. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. So I'm sitting here thinking, how can I take this aspect of this debate back to my practice? How is it informing me as a psychotherapist? And Raquel, I really found your passion helpful. Thank you. In particular, I was reflecting on a sense of hopelessness and a lack of sense of agency in my private practice and also work in a therapeutic community. A lack of even thinking you have it, or hopelessness. And you said depersonalization and alienation, that was really helpful. And then Giovanni, your idea of this depression being burnout, so spoke to me about my private clients too. I suppose I'm sort of thinking, what do we do with this? Do we need a revolt, or what do we do with this a real profound lack of a sense of agency amongst the people we work with, and even ourselves, or despair, does this make sense? I don't know if it does.
Plants, flowers, ecology. Plants, flowers, ecology.
Now, thank you. Labor.
I haven't done anything.
Yes, yes, with your piano fingers you did it. I've been sitting more silently to listening these wonderful comments that hearing here. It's very liberating to us, even if many of the messages are not that liberating. But in your comment and also in your question, I started to think of this, that a bit that I thought to say here also is that actually within psychiatry, we have been living through all this what has been spoken here. During the last 25 years, it's a very black period in psychiatry, and it came out in this evidence-based medicine system that was based in the idea through which mainly the work of psychiatrists are controlled by this very naive treatment of excellence guideline. And what is even more terrible is that the science on which these guidelines are based is very poor. Psychiatric research actually is very poor in medicine, in thinking of the science on the whole, and still take over all the power of regulating how psychiatrists should be working. But even worse that it did not only concern psychiatrists, because what happens was that psychotherapists stopped to have psychotherapy with psychotic patients, because now it's said that it's a brain disease that you do not need to have. And family therapists stopped to meet with families with psychotic persons because they were said that it's a brain disease and so on. So that actually it's like a the kind of blacksmith period in psychiatry that we have been living through, and in that way I don't actually follow your comment about this medical model, because it really can be very dangerous idea that in the way that it has taken over of everything. And in that way I feel much more positive at the moment, because we really have I've realized that psychotherapists have become back into the business. They meet with people, most of mental health problems. Family therapists have a lot of interest, and we have been talking today that there's a lot of new ideas in psychiatry to start to work with the families and open dialogue, so that there is also very positive thing in my mind that has happened. And for me, the response, I also like your comment about the Marxism, because it's all the labor unite, come together. And it's working together instead of this privatization of the work, that we only work through our computer with the fragmented tasks, or that we only work in our office and meeting clients after clients, but organizing the work in a way that really working together in teams, in open, and that way everything is open also to us and in the teams. Everyone is seeing how the doctor is working, and the doctor is seeing how the other nurses and others are working, and of course our families are seeing how we are working, and that's really, for me, a response to almost everything, not everything, but almost everything.
My question is about if the relation between the politics of neoliberalism and psychiatry, because I remember I read a perverse effect of anti-psychiatry is said in the 80s. They said, well, if there is no mental illness...
It's difficult. It's very difficult to know and to decide this problem, because there is also the problem what mental disorder, and nobody knows about this. And what psychiatry? Nobody can. I think psychiatry is not a specialty. Psychiatry is a branch of medicine, like medicine and surgery. Psychiatry is the third branch. So, but people have no consensus about this. People don't know. And there is a stigma that people avoid to go directly to psychiatrists. People generally go to general physician, in Portugal, the family physician, and he has some medicines he can use, but generally in small doses. And when there is a great problem, he refers it to a psychiatrist, and that a psychiatrist can deal incisively and with patient. After this, he can go to a psychologist. It depends institutions, depends the insurance packets also. Depends from the possibility of paying or not. And there are psychologists at universities also, and in several institutions. But in fact, perhaps the main line to deal with great problems is psychologists. And recently they were very important in catastrophes and in INEM, in urgency. Psychologists can have a great role with this, with anxiety and fear and these catastrophes. And psychodrama, for instance, and psychodramatic techniques. And, but it is a difficult question, and it depends to know what is mental disorders and how can we deal with them. And this is, as we see, is a great discussion.
I would like to add that, yes, Giovanni asked also if neoliberalism is a... yes. Yeah, now it's working. Thank you. I would say that neoliberalism is causing illness because, of course, the way neoliberalism organized society in the West is not the right way, if we can say this. It's the over deregulation in different levels of society created a real insecure situation for a lot of workers in the Western societies. Then I think we need to reject the neoliberalist project. But this is one thing. Another thing is to confuse this rejection with the old ideologies in the West. We now are facing quite new challenges. And the challenges we are facing are not the same of the 19th century or 20th century, are new challenges, really new challenges. And what we know now is that the system, how it's working, it's not answering the needs, and we need to build new answers. And this is a challenge. We are creative as humans. And we can't rely only in the recipes we know from the past. Yes, we need to learn with the past. But now we are faced with the challenge of building new and creative ways to answer.
Just one point about time. So we are coming to an end, towards an end. So maybe one or two last questions, and we need to finish.
Only.
I have to answer to a couple of questions.
Huh? Giovanni?
Yes, I had a question from the lady in red who disappeared. And unfortunately, in order to answer her question, I should have asked her question, what she means by relational psychopathology. So I'm afraid I will not be able to answer this question because I don't know what is relational psychopathology. Just you may mean many things with this. I might say that there is no psychopathology that is not relational, but I don't know if it makes sense. Anyway. But then I have a very serious question, although from a very mild and tender voice, is what can we do with this? Or what the hell can we do with this, perhaps? Well, I don't know. Well, I don't even know if there is a we. Okay, I hope there is a we. But it seems that there are very tiny, small we's around. I travel around to conferences. Last week I was in Paris, and that was a we. It was very interesting we. I mean, topics, they were not so different from those we are discussing today. One issue could be how to bring together these different we's, you see. But that's going to be very, very difficult, I think. I think that probably we should simply start with doing what each of us is more or less able to do. For instance, I myself am more or less able to read and to write, to care for some patients, to try to make myself understood by other persons, to listen. I'm quite a good listener. When I decided to be a psychiatrist, it was a kind of decision I made, perhaps very pessimistic, that there was no possibility to do some politics, and then I thought that the only way I could be useful could be by helping singular persons. But I admire very much people who are engaged in politics, and I would certainly give my help if asked. I'm available for that. I've never been asked, to be honest, and who knows if this will happen. That's it.
Only a comment. Thank you, Giovanni, for your point, because I think we have to stress the link between the clinical, I'm a clinical, but we need to work together in the political level. Because when we see the patient with some suffering, we have to go beyond the individual suffer, and you have to think about the social symptom, because we are working in the field. We are in a very bad situation in mental health care system, not only in Portugal, but I think across Europe and in the world. And then if you don't bring some experience from clinical, and if you keep our small knowledge from the people and the suffer from the people, and the other level, in the political level, the people are working with the financial and other juridical struggles, and the most important things like the subjectivity, the emotion level are in the very, very bad situation. Then the pathological is important to keep the idea of in the pathos. It's important to understand what is this pathos. It's not the medical approach of pathos, but what is the claim of the patient when they are some kind of symptoms. It's not only a pathos, individual pathos, it's a social pathos. I think we have to work together on that with historians and the economicals and the other professions. It's not only the technical approach in clinical. We need to work together.
I think Rex wants to make a comment. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm aware we're close to the end, aren't we? Just a couple of things I've been thinking. One, I love that idea of who is the we, but over the last few years, I've been to a few conferences like this, and the we is coming together, and this conference is part of that process of bringing the we together. I think there are a lot of people thinking these things. And the other thing I want to say is I'm not as pessimistic as I think Lucy was talking about earlier, because I think in Thomas Kuhn's Structure of the Scientific Revolution, I mean, paradigm change is, it's an overused word at the moment, but it doesn't come about through a big revolution and a big change. It comes about through lots of little things happening and lots of chaos going on, like Jaco's saying about with bleak time for psychiatry in the last couple of decades. I think that's what we're going through. And in another 10 years or so, we'll look back and think, God, is it really like this? And it's gone completely different, I suspect. And, service user involvement, relational practice, democratic ways of doing things. I think those are all happening in little places. And conferences like this are helping to coalesce them, I think. So a note of optimism, I feel, in all this. So, yeah.
Okay, only about psychopathology is a very important question, but we have no reply. But it's important because when we, general psychiatrists, are in front of a patient, we are permanently thinking what made this patient to suffer, what made it suffer. Was his mother or his father? Psychoanalytic psychopathology. Was serotonin or dopamine? Medicines, pharmacs. Was sleep? Was a problem of sleep, circadian rhythms, which are very important, and or is a hidden trauma, a rape or something very old, and we are constantly thinking about this, and this is psychopathology. But there are several. But from this, our actuation, our prescription and what we are going to do depends on these ideas we have. This is why it is very confused and difficult now. But nowadays there are very strong psychotherapies and very strong ways to promote psychotherapies like EMDR, psychosis, pendular movements of the eyes, hypnosis, PNL, a lot of things now that are very, very disseminated, but we are in a medical and psychological situation we are trying to contain in order to do this, only to help people and not to to provoke more problems that we have now. Thank you.
I think I'm thinking that psychology also told us that after 2 hours, people's attention span will start to go. So I think it's about time that we put an end to the debate and to the Congress. I would like to thank everyone that is in the panel, everyone that was in the audience. I'm not sure if José wants to say anything, or is it we should know?
Just thank you all. Hope you enjoyed the afternoon. I certainly did today. And it's good to see that we're all working to improve mental health in particular. We certainly need in countries everybody's help.
Well, thank you all, and I'll see some of you at the dinner, and thank you very much.